Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. 2 weeks ago, on November the 13th, a chartered plane carrying 153 Palestinians from genocide-torn Gaza, many without the required travel documents, landed at the OR Tambo International Airport. And for South African officials, they say they were caught blindsided. After nearly 12 hours of scrambling, the group were allowed to disembark into the care of humanitarian group Gift of the Givers. Now, more details have emerged about the scheme being run by the so-called organization Majd Europe, through which activists argue Israel is advancing its ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. The Palestinian passengers were charged a hefty amount of money by some organizations, which says on its website that it coordinates evacuations from conflict zones. Now, one individual that was there at the airport to welcome the Palestinians, and of course will break this down for us, is none other than Jeenah, who is the Afro-Middle East Centre Director. Naeem, always good having you on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Naeem, Majd Europe. This has been a name since, of course, that day on November the 13th that has come up. I think for the viewers out there that probably have the knowledge, but for those who have been living under a rock, which we'd like to think is not the case, how have they been able to facilitate the starting from Gaza and, of course, to the various destinations, or in this case, how it landed up, or the Palestinian refugees landing up within South Africa?
So what happened was that earlier this year, before the so-called ceasefire took effect, a number of Palestinians in Gaza received messages by WhatsApp or Telegram saying that if they wanted safe passage out of Gaza and they wanted to escape the genocide, basically, that they should go to a particular website and register. That website was the website of Majd Europe. They were asked for certain details about their family members and then asked to pay an amount of money. For most people, that amount ranged between $1,400 and $2,000 US. For some people, it went up to around $5,000. Once they paid that amount, they were told that they would get called on any day and given more information. So typically, people were called at night, on a particular night, with the second flight, for example. Some people said they're not called, they received a message at around 11 p.m. that night to say that the next morning they must meet at a particular spot. When they got to that spot, they were told they're not allowed to take anything. There were buses waiting for them. Bus drivers had lists of names. They got onto the buses. The buses crossed the Karam Abu Salem crossing into Israel, where everyone was searched. Some of their personal effects were taken from them. And then they got back onto the buses, which then drove to Ramon. They were there, put on a chartered flight. Up to this point, no one was told where they were going to end up, what their destination was going to be. They were put on a chartered flight that landed in Nairobi. A couple of hours later, they were put on another chartered flight that then landed in Johannesburg. With the second flight, some people in Nairobi were told that they're going to Johannesburg. Others were told on the plane by the crew. But in general, people had no idea what their ultimate destination would be. With the first flight, which arrived on the 28th of October, once people disembarked and passed through immigration, they received WhatsApp messages to one member per family to say which hotel they were booked at, and they had to take their own Uber to get there. Once they got to the hotel, they were told that they were booked into that hotel or guest house or whatever it was for 7 days. Thereafter, they were left to their own devices. And the group facilitating all of this is the organization you mentioned, Majd Europe, which upon more investigation, it's now been shown that Majd Europe is actually a project of something called the Voluntary Emigration Bureau, which is an office within the Israeli Defense Forces. So this Majd Europe is an ethnic cleansing project of the Israelis to try and get rid of people from Gaza.
And of course, there is a man that is obviously leading this, Naeem. He's a dual Israeli-Estonian called Tomer Yaner Lind. So, from our understanding, Haaretz newspaper has said that Lind is working with a unit within the Israeli military. So when you put two and two together, it kind of shows that this very same Israeli occupation forces that are conducting this ethnic cleansing on the ground is doing it also through forced transfers.
Yes, exactly. I mean, as I say, these flights and this Majd Europe is part of this project of ethnic cleansing of Gaza by the Israelis. That Lind person has now been shown to be the head of Majd, although the names on the website is a couple of Palestinian names, but heading this project is this Tomer Lind.
Naeem, the passport stamps, of course, when this was probably one of the big talking points when the 153 Palestinians landed at OR Tambo. Is it historically within Israel to go ahead and not stamp passports, which of course made it very difficult for these refugees to disembark on the plane? Can you break that down for us? Because of course, listening to various immigration experts, a lot of the confusion or discussion points came with regards to the actual non-stamping of the Palestinian passports.
So whenever someone exits from a country, whether it's by plane, by ship, or by road, crosses a border or exits at a port of entry and exit, that person gets some kind of a proof of exit. For most countries, it's a stamp in your passport that says that you've exited. Israel no longer puts a stamp in the passport. They issue something called a B/2 entry-exit form. In the case of both of the people on both these flights that arrived in South Africa, the 28th of October and 13th of November, they had no proof of exit, no stamp, no B/2 form, nothing. And usually a country would not be willing to accept someone that doesn't have any proof of exit from another country, because it means that you've exited a country illegally. Usually that's what it means. And so the Israelis clearly, deliberately ensured that none of these 300 odd people would get any kind of proof of entry. Proof of exit. And this, with the second plane, was a cause of great problem for them, of course, because Border Management Authority in South Africa refused to allow them to disembark because none of them had that exit proof.
Naeem, before we go to the break, my understanding, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong with regards to this, and that's the reason why we have you on. When they leave Ramon Air Base in Israel, do they know where they're going to? Or are they told there's certain destinations that are going to be where you are going to be going at this moment? Because my understanding is that many of the Palestinians who arrived in South Africa were not told that they're going to be arriving in South Africa. They were promised different destinations like Malaysia or Indonesia or even Middle Eastern countries like Egypt. So talk to us about that. Do they know when these Palestinians pay the amount to Majd Europe? Are they told that you're going to be arriving at a certain destination?
No. They're not told when they pay. They're not told when they get onto the buses. They're not told when they leave Ramon airport. As I say, on the second flight, some people were told in Nairobi.
Yes.
That they're going to Johannesburg, but otherwise they were not told where they're going to end up. There was a sense we got, particularly from the first flight. Some of the people on that flight believed that they will likely end up in Indonesia or Malaysia because a previous flight had landed in Indonesia. And of course, the reason for South Africa, Indonesia, Malaysia being the kind of target countries is that these are three countries that do not have visa requirements for Palestinians. They either get visa on entry or it's visa free. And so these were the kind of targeted countries. But as I say, except for a few who were told in Nairobi that they're going to South Africa, passengers were not told what their destination is going to be.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Naeem Jeenah. And of course, while the investigations, or South African authorities have said the investigations are continuing, one needs to take into cognizance that these are 153 human lives whose futures many still do not know what is going to happen with regards to that. Do stay tuned. My conversation continues after this break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Naeem Jeenah. Naeem, always good to have you on. Shukran again for staying with us. Naeem, Border Management Authority, Home Affairs, of course, Department of International Relations and Cooperation, of course, would have been the three stakeholders that would have probably have known of this anticipated flight, or of course, when the plane had landed, would of course facilitated whatever assistance was needed to the Palestinians. How much, and you mentioned, of course, the non-stamping of the passports on these Palestinians, how much of that was a hindrance towards the very three stakeholders that I'm mentioning right here, which of course led to them waiting, and I'm talking about the Palestinian refugees waiting on the plane for such a long period of time?
Well, first, let me say that, whenever a flight is planned, there are flight plans that are submitted to every country that's involved, including countries that the flight is going to fly over. There are passenger manifests that are sent to countries where the flight is going to land. And so that must have happened in this case. South African authorities would have received a flight plan, would have received passenger manifests. Our question then is that if you believed these were people from Gaza without the necessary documentation, and the necessary documentation means, number one, proof of exit from some country, number two, return ticket. If people want to visit as tourists, they require a return ticket, and number three, they require some proof of accommodation while they're here. If you believed that that wasn't the case, then why did you accept the flight plan and agree that this flight could take off from Nairobi and land in South Africa? And so that's one of the issues that requires investigation. Why did the relevant South African authorities, AXA, BMA, etc., agree that this flight can land in Johannesburg when they knew that there was, from their perspective, a problem? The second issue here is, and they must have known. I mean, there's no way a flight could come into land without a flight plan being submitted to a whole range of authorities on this side. The second issue is that once the plane had landed, the manner in which the passengers were treated, we believe, was not in accordance with human rights, with our constitution, in terms of the dignity of people, in terms of the rights of children. There were several children on that flight. You'll see in the videos, in the clips that you're showing, several children, a number of babies as well. Babies sitting in their nappies for up to 12 hours, all of that kind of stuff, and border management not allowing them to disembark. That is a serious problem on the South African side, and that's that needs to be part of the investigation. Why did they take these kinds of measures, confining people on a plane for 12 hours? The airline had not, until early afternoon, the airline had not supplied any water to people. There was no proper air supply on the plane. There was no food that was provided, etc. These are serious problems on the South African side.
Naeem, as we, of course, speak right now, the Palestinian passport holders have a 90-day visa window. And of course, 90 days can be a long time and it can also be a short time. What is the plans, I think, for the 153 Palestinians that are here currently? Because, these are human beings that we're talking about. These are individuals that have experienced 2 years of a deadly genocide, decades of occupation by Israel. And I guess, we're asking what now, especially in terms of, finding out how the South African law could also protect these very same individuals. So I know, Naeem, you've been heavily involved, whether it's, through humanitarian assistance and that, but what is the way forward for these Palestinians now, especially given that, after the 90 days, no one really knows what's going to happen?
So let's remember first that it's not 150 odd Palestinians we're talking about, it's around 300.
Okay.
2 flights, the first flight that arrived on the 28th of October, and so they've been here almost a month already, and they have more like 60 days left than 30 days. Than 90 days. And then there's the second flight that arrived on the 13th. So people are, the fact that were able to get into the country, they have 90 days away from bombs falling on their head and the children being sniped by Israeli snipers. In a sense, they in a calmer, safer environment to be able to think more carefully and to make decisions. They have, from the time they landed, 90 days in which to make their decisions. Several of the people from both flights have already left South Africa. So, for example, 2 days ago, we saw off at the airport one family, a mother and 3 kids. The father was in Kuwait from early 2023. And so, the family hasn't been united since for more than 2 years. The father, for the first time, held his baby yesterday morning. So they obviously, that mother and those children, they wanted to be reunited with the father, and they left and joined him in Kuwait. Others have left to go to other places, Egypt, for example. So several of them have already left. Others are considering leaving in the next few weeks or month or so. They'll decide, mainly those who have relatives elsewhere and want to be reunited with their families. And then there are some who want to stay in South Africa, and they will apply for asylum on the basis that they're fleeing a genocide, etc. All of them, I should say, from both flights, and whether they are going to be applying for asylum or have gone elsewhere, all of them have a very firm objective in their minds, and that is that ultimately they want to return to Gaza. That is home, and that's where they want to go back to. So, for example, those who are considering applying for asylum, one of the questions they've repeatedly asked the lawyers is, if they get asylum in South Africa, would they be able to go back to Gaza? Would they be allowed to go back to? And of course, the answer is yes. But that's the question foremost in their minds, because most of them do want to relocate. So that's how things will unfold. It's unclear at the moment exactly how many from each of those flights will want to apply for asylum and stay in South Africa, and how many will leave. They have some time in which to make that decision, and so they will. 1 or 2 families are already planning now to go and apply for the asylum.
One final question, Naeem. You and I have had conversations since the start of this genocide of Israel's violation of international law. They're violating the ceasefire as we speak right now. And this offers, an organization like Majd Europe to go ahead and continue its project, which clearly seems to be that of ethnic cleansing. And I guess, how cognizant does the international community, if they are really going to be cognizant of this, of the way in which this is being manipulated and done, to go ahead and not just charge Palestinian families, but put them in such a difficult position right now, given the state of where we are in Gaza?
Well, I mean, clearly for all of these 300 people and other flights that might have gone elsewhere, these are massive human rights abuses. I mean, some of us have been saying that this is akin to human trafficking. Consider the kind of stereotype of human trafficking, people in a poor or desperate situation, paying some money, being put on a truck, and the truck crossing a border into another country, then being smuggled in. Except that in this case, people don't know which country they're going to end up in. But that's exactly what happened. They paid some money, they got put onto a flight, then got put onto another flight, and they ended up in a third country, not knowing what reception they will receive, and not knowing which that third country would be. But let's be honest, the so-called international community has been unable to stop a clear genocide from taking place over 2 years, despite various provisional measures being issued by the International Court of Justice, has been unable to do that. After a ceasefire supposedly took hold in Gaza, we have now more than 300 people, 300 Palestinians killed by the Israeli army in Gaza in violation of that ceasefire, and the international community has done nothing about that. There were supposed to have been at minimum 600 trucks entering Gaza with aid every single day. The Israelis are allowing only about 200 in with food that is of horrific nutritional value, which means that the genocide is continuing. If people don't have adequate food and nutrition, the genocide is continuing, and the international community does nothing about it. Well, I shouldn't say does nothing about it. The UN Security Council took a resolution last week that basically entrenches the genocidal situation, deprives Palestinians of the right to resist, puts into place a colonial foreign government to look after Gaza, etc. I don't think they're going to do much about this Al-Majd organization, which has been spiriting away a few hundred people out of Gaza. It would be a small kind of blip in the bigger genocide that's taking place. But for the rest of us, I think that this is an important thing, that we need to highlight that the ethnic cleansing is taking place in various different ways. And this is one of those ways. Getting people onto planes and shipping them off is one of the ways in which this ethnic cleansing is taking place. And let me end by saying, for us, that when you look at the profile of the people on these two flights, the 300-odd people who arrived in South Africa, these are mostly professionals, business people. On the first flight, there were, I think, 5 doctors, or at least 5 doctors, some of whom ran UNRWA clinics back in Gaza. There were teachers, there were academics. Now, if you collect together all the doctors and the teachers and the academics and put them on planes and ship them out, you can imagine a Gaza that is left without anyone to be in clinics and hospitals and serve the people, without anyone to teach at the universities and schools. What would be left of the population that is left behind? And so clearly this is part of an ethnic cleansing project, but also a part of the bigger kind of genocide against the people in Gaza.
Jeenah, always a pleasure having you on. Shukran so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
That's Jeenah, who is the director for the Afro-Middle East Centre. After the break, we're going to be discussing the G20, and of course we saw yesterday a low-level handover between Turco and a junior U.S. official as the U.S. takes over the G20 presidency. My guest up next will be Crispin Piri from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Do stay tuned.